the secret Alpha Queen. Kela stood on the balcony of her pack house overlooking the vast expanse of the Moonlight Pack's territory. The weight of leadership pressed heavily on her shoulders, though no one besides her knew she bore it. Officially, her father, Alpha Dorian Moonlight, was in charge. In truth, she had been running the pack ever since her 3 older brothers were killed in pack wars, each lost to bloody battles that had nearly torn their people apart. The grief of their loss had broken her father's spirit, leaving Kela no choice but to step up and protect her people. She had vowed never to let their deaths be in vain, to make the Moonlight Pack stronger than ever. But she had to do so from the shadows, because the Werewolf Kingdom would never accept a female alpha, especially one without a mate. Her father, still determined to secure the future of their pack, had been attempting to arrange her marriage to a mighty alpha. If she were married, her pack would be safe, its power secured. The Werewolf Kingdom held firm in its traditions. An alpha should claim their fated mate to enhance their power, but political unions were just as acceptable. "Kela, my daughter, you know I love you more than anything," Alpha Dorian said, his voice gentle, yet firm. "But our people, they follow ancient laws. If you remain unwed, they will see it as a sign of weakness." Kela crossed her arms, her emerald eyes burning with defiance. "Father, I have led this pack in secret for years. No one has questioned our strength. Why should marriage decide our fate?" Dorian sighed heavily, stepping closer. "Because tradition is a force stronger than any warrior. I do not wish to force you, but I must think of the future of our pack. If you marry a strong alpha, our people will be safe." "And what if my mate is weak? What if he is a coward who rejects me?" she asked, her voice laced with frustration. Her father hesitated, sorrow flickering in his eyes. "Then you will show them that you are stronger than fate itself. But Kela, promise me one thing. If you must fight this, do so wisely. Do not let your anger cloud your judgment." Kela's jaw tightened, but she nodded. "I will prove to them that strength is not in tradition, but in the leader who fights for them." Yet Kela refused to be caged by a forced marriage. If she were to have a mate, it would be because he chose her, not because of her status or the strength of their combined power. A letter had arrived that morning announcing the upcoming Alpha Warrior Tournament. It was an opportunity for alphas to showcase their strength, agility, and combat skills in human form. Kela saw her chance. If she entered as a masked warrior, taking on the name of one of her late brothers, she could prove to the kingdom that leadership was not dictated by gender. She had told her father that she would meet her so-called future husband at the tournament, subtly hinting that her fated mate had to be there since she was an alpha herself. In truth, she would hide her scent and fight among them, unseen, unknown. By her side stood her beta, Thomas, and her loyal maid, Ella. They were the only 2 who knew her true identity and had supported her decision to enter the tournament. Thomas had helped her train in secret, ensuring her skills remained sharp, while Ella had meticulously prepared her disguise, making sure no one would recognize her. The tournament grounds buzzed with excitement. Warriors, alphas, and their betas gathered to witness the spectacle. The scent of sweat, power, and aggression filled the air as the contests were about to begin. Before she even stepped into the arena, a sudden jolt struck her core. The mate bond. Her breath caught in her throat as she turned, and there he was, Alpha Magnus of the Bloodfang Pack. A tall, powerful warrior with piercing silver eyes. He strode toward her, his brows furrowed in confusion. Kela had masked her scent, appearing as a mere Omega in baggy clothes and her long hair tied, but the bond was unmistakable. Alpha Magnus froze for a brief moment, his silver eyes narrowing as something unexplainable stirred within him. A faint pull, almost imperceptible, clawed at the back of his mind, a sensation foreign and unwelcome. His wolf shifted uneasily, its instincts flickering with recognition, but Magnus shoved it down. There was no way fate had tied him to an Omega. Disgust curled in his gut, and he scoffed, dismissing the moment of doubt as a mistake. He would not be bound to weakness. Would he recognize it? Would he choose her despite her perceived status? He hesitated, then his face twisted in disgust. "You're weak," he sneered. "An Omega? Fate must be joking." Kela felt her heart constrict, but she forced her emotions down. "I, Alpha Magnus of the Bloodfang Pack, reject you as my mate," he declared coldly. Thomas and Ella were shocked but kept their silence. The pain sliced through her like a dagger, but she didn't let it show. Instead, she lifted her chin, squared her shoulders, and met his gaze with unwavering resolve. "I, Kela Moonlight, reject you as my mate," she declared, her voice steady and void of hesitation. Fine. If he couldn't see past status, he didn't deserve her. The rejection should have broken her, but instead it fueled her. She gathered all her rage and devastation and channeled them into the tournament. Every strike, every movement became an outlet for her fury. Thomas and Ella stayed close, offering silent support. One by one, she defeated every alpha in her path, including Magnus himself. For a fleeting moment, as Magnus lay on the ground catching his breath, his gaze flickered with confusion. There was something oddly familiar about the way his opponent fought, something buried deep in his instincts that he refused to acknowledge. But the moment passed as quickly as it came, and he shook off the thought, unaware that his rejected mate had just bested him. But the final match would be her greatest challenge yet. Her opponent was the reigning champion, Alpha King Rhaegar of the Dark Moon Pack. Ruthless, merciless, a ruler who had lost his mate and governed with an iron fist. No alpha had ever bested him. Kela felt the weight of his presence the moment he entered the arena. Tall, powerful, with storm-gray eyes that held no mercy. His reputation as the most brutal alpha in the kingdom preceded him. He did not fight for honor, he fought to dominate. The battle was fierce. Kela matched his every move, countering his strength with agility, his aggression with precision. The crowd roared as she landed a devastating blow, sending the Alpha King staggering back. Thomas and Ella watched anxiously from the sidelines, their eyes filled with pride and worry. Then disaster struck. A powerful kick knocked her helmet off and golden hair cascaded down her back. The entire arena fell silent. Her breath hitched as her gaze locked onto Rhaegar's. The moment their eyes met, a second bond snapped into place. His eyes widened in recognition. Her disguise had worn off from the intense physical interaction. "Mate," he growled, his voice laced with disbelief and something deeper, something possessive. Kela's world spun. A second chance mate? And not just anyone. The Alpha King. The arena exploded into chaos, but Kela barely registered it. Rhaegar took a step toward her, his ruthless demeanor shifting into something primal. "Mine," he rumbled, his voice sending shivers down her spine. Thomas and Ella exchanged glances, understanding that everything had changed. Meanwhile, Alpha Magnus turned to his beta, scoffing. "That poor Omega woman I just rejected. What a pathetic fate." His beta's eyes widened in shock. "My lord, that is no Omega. That is Kela Moonlight, the Alpha Princess of the Moonlight Pack, and now she has just found her second chance mate." Magnus's expression darkened, fury twisting his features. "What? That wretched woman, she deceived me." His hands curled into fists. "I will not accept this. I challenge Alpha Rhaegar for her." Rhaegar smirked, stepping forward. "You have no claim over her. But if you wish to challenge me, I will oblige." His voice was lethal, promising devastation. Kela stepped forward, her voice cutting through the commotion. "I have already accepted your rejection, Magnus. You're only after power. You never wanted me." Her voice trembled slightly, but she held her ground. But to no vein, the battle erupted with an explosion of force. Magnus lunged first, but Rhaegar anticipated his movements with ease, countering each attack with brutal efficiency. The fight was short-lived. Rhaegar was faster, stronger, and far more ruthless. With a bone-crushing punch, he sent Magnus sprawling to the ground, blood trickling from his mouth. Rhaegar loomed over him, his eyes cold and unyielding. Magnus coughed, blood dripping from his split lip as he looked up at the Alpha King, the weight of his defeat settling over him. He had underestimated Rhaegar. He had believed himself cunning enough to outmaneuver him, to reclaim Kela through force, but now he saw the truth. He had been a fool. The realization flickered in his eyes, a mixture of disbelief and bitter regret. Rhaegar bared his teeth, a growl vibrating deep in his chest. "You are lucky I did not kill you for trying to claim what is mine," he snarled, his voice thick with barely restrained fury. He leaned down, his dominance pressing against Magnus like a suffocating force. "But let this be your final warning. Should you ever come near her again, I will not be so merciful." The crowd gasped, the message clear. Kela belonged to the Alpha King, and no one would dare challenge him again. She glanced at Rhaegar, feeling overwhelmed. She had fought to prove her strength to stand alone, and now she stood before the most powerful alpha in the kingdom, bound by a mate bond she wasn't sure she could handle. Her plan had worked and failed. She was doomed now. Panic surged through Kela, her breath coming in sharp gasps. She turned on her heel and bolted, undoing her armor piece by piece as she ran. Ella, knowing exactly what to do, swiftly gathered the discarded pieces, ensuring no trace of Kela's disguise remained. With one final, desperate step, Kela shifted into her mighty pure white wolf, her sleek form gliding effortlessly into the dense forest beyond the arena. A powerful bone-rattling howl echoed through the air, freezing every werewolf in place. Rhaegar's howl. The very ground trembled beneath its force, sending a warning that resonated through every wolf present. Warriors halted mid-motion, their instincts screaming submission to the sheer dominance laced within the sound. Even Magnus's pack members hesitated, their wolves whimpering in response. The message was clear. Kela was his, and no one would dare interfere. The silence that followed was deafening, the weight of his claim sinking into the hearts of all who heard it. Rhaegar gave chase, his massive pitch-black wolf a terrifying force as he pursued her through the moonlit woods. Kela pushed herself harder, her heart pounding, but she knew it was futile. He was stronger, faster, and relentless. Within moments he was upon her, tackling her to the ground with a force that sent them tumbling. She struggled, her claws scraping against the dirt, but Rhaegar was unyielding. He pinned her down effortlessly, his glowing eyes burning into hers. "You can run all you want, little wolf," he rumbled, his breath hot against her fur. "But you are mine now, Shift." Kela shifted back into her human form, her chest rising and falling rapidly as she glared up at him. "I have a duty to my pack, Rhaegar. I will not abandon them. I do not need a mate. I need to protect my people." Rhaegar's jaw clenched, his grip on her tightening slightly. "You think I would let my mate lead alone? You belong at my side, ruling together. Your pack will be safe under my command." "I never asked for this," she snapped, frustration and fear warring inside her. "I entered that tournament to prove that I could stand alone, not to be claimed." A low growl rumbled in Rhaegar's throat. "You don't have a choice, Kela." With that, he lifted her effortlessly over his shoulder, ignoring her struggles. "You are coming back with me." She pounded against his back, but he did not relent. His beta, Andrew, had already ensured Ella was safely escorted, while Thomas had been sent ahead to inform Alpha Dorian of what had transpired. Thomas had no choice but to accept it. Disguised and without warriors to defend them, they were powerless against the might of the Alpha King's army. Kela's heart pounded in her chest. Her plan had worked too well, and now she was trapped in the very fate she had sought to avoid. Rhaegar brought her back to his territory, straight into his grand pack house, which looked more like a neglected fairy tale castle. The massive stone structure loomed over the surrounding landscape, its towers casting dark shadows under the moonlight. Once, it might have been a place of grandeur, but now, it was void of warmth. The corridors were silent, filled only with echoes of past glory, and the scent of dust clung to the air. The pack members moved like ghosts, their eyes downcast, their voices hushed. There was no laughter, no joy, only duty and silence. The moment they entered his chambers, he locked the heavy wooden doors behind them, trapping her inside. Kela spun on her heel, her emerald eyes burning with defiance. "You can't keep me here," she hissed, slamming her fists against the door. Rhaegar crossed his arms, his gaze dark and unreadable. "I can, and I will. You belong to me, Kela. The bond between us is unbreakable. You feel it, don't you?" His voice was dangerously soft, laced with an undeniable dominance, and Kela's body trembled as the mate bond strained against her resistance. Her wolf howled within, craving the touch of its fated mate, but she fought against it with everything she had. She refused to surrender. "I have a duty to my pack. My people need me. I can't stay here and be your prisoner." Rhaegar took a step forward, his imposing presence overwhelming. "You are not my prisoner. You are my mate, and I will not let you throw away what the moon goddess has given us." She shook her head violently, backing away until her legs hit the edge of his massive bed. "You don't understand. My father needs me, my pack." "Your father has already accepted your fate," Rhaegar interrupted. "Thomas delivered the news. They have no warrior strong enough to fight me, and even if they did, it would change nothing. You are meant to be mine, Kela. Running won't change that." She clenched her fists, breathing hard. The room felt suffocating, the pull of the bond tightening around her like chains. "I don't want this," she whispered, voice trembling. "I never wanted this." Rhaegar's expression softened for a fleeting moment before he closed the distance between them. He gripped her chin gently, tilting her face up to meet his. "Then fight me all you want, little wolf," he murmured, his voice dangerously low. "But you are mine, and I do not let go of what belongs to me." Kela's breath hitched as his eyes darkened with possession. The war inside her waged fiercely, duty versus destiny, defiance versus desire. She was trapped in a game she could not win. With a growl of frustration, Rhaegar abruptly released her and turned away, his muscles tense with barely contained fury. Without another word, he stormed to the door, throwing it open before stepping through and slamming it shut behind him. The heavy lock clicked into place, sealing her inside. She stood there, breathing heavily, her mind racing. The silence of the room felt suffocating, her heartbeat the only sound echoing against the cold stone walls. Her chest tightened with frustration, the weight of her captivity settling over her like a suffocating blanket. She clenched her fists, willing herself not to break, not to give in to the helplessness creeping into her veins. Moments later, the door creaked open again and Ella slipped inside, quickly shutting it behind her. She carried a bundle of their belongings in her arms, her eyes filled with worry. "Ella!" Kela gasped, rushing to her maid. "How did you get in?" Ella placed the bundle down and exhaled. "Beta Andrew let me through. They gave me a room just one floor below, Kela. That's not common for a servant, especially not in this pack. Usually we are placed in the cellars or on the ground floor." She hesitated before adding, "That means the Alpha values me, values us. Maybe he's not as cruel as you think." Kela shook her head, gripping Ella's hands. "I can't stay here, Ella. I need to get back to my pack. We need to find a way out." Ella sighed and led her to a huge tub filled with warm water. "If we're going to run, we need a plan, and you need to be strong." As Ella gently bathed her, Kela gritted her teeth. "I don't care what kind of rooms he gives us. I don't care if he says he values me. He took me by force. He's trying to control me just like all the others. I won't let him." Ella dabbed a cloth against her shoulder, her expression thoughtful. "Maybe he just doesn't know how to do this differently, Kela. He lost his first mate. Maybe he's afraid to lose you too." Kela scoffed, turning her gaze away. "That doesn't make this right. I won't be his captive, Ella. I won't let this be my fate." Ella asintió, entendiendo su resolución. "Then we'll find a way, Kela." Together, Ella smiled at the sight, nudging Kela gently, creating slowness. Kela remained locked in her room, with Ella being the only one allowed to come and go. A guard stood stationed outside the door at all times, ensuring she remained within the confines of her gilded prison. The only reprieve came when Ella brought her food and whispered words of encouragement. Still, the reality of her captivity gnawed at her. After dinner, Ella had bid her good night and left, her worried gaze lingering before the door shut behind her. The room felt emptier than before, the silence stretching uncomfortably as Kela lay on the large bed, staring at the ceiling. Then the door creaked open. She immediately sat up as Rhaegar stepped in, his towering presence consuming the space. He didn't speak at first, merely watching her with an unreadable expression before walking over and sitting down beside her dangerously close. The warmth of his body radiated toward her, and the mate bond surged between them, thick and inescapable. Her wolf, Asina, whimpered inside her, desperate to bridge the gap between them, and she could feel the same turmoil within Rhaegar. His wolf, Xavier, prowled just beneath his skin, his golden eyes flickering with restrained desire. The air between them crackled with tension, a pull so strong it made Kela's breath hitch. Rhaegar lifted a hand, gently brushing a strand of hair from her face. "You've been quiet today," he murmured, his voice low and intimate. Kela stiffened but refused to look away. "What do you expect me to do? Celebrate my captivity?" She bit out, though her voice was softer than she intended. A smirk ghosted across his lips. "I don't expect anything, little wolf, but I thought you'd be more rebellious." She exhaled sharply, trying to ignore the way his scent wrapped around her like a drug. "I'm saving my strength." His fingers traced the curve of her jaw, sending shivers down her spine. "You're fighting what's inevitable," he whispered, his breath warm against her cheek. "You feel it, don't you? The way our bond pulls at us? The way our wolves yearn for each other?" She did. Goddess, she did. Every fiber of her being craved his touch, his presence, but she refused to succumb. As much as she wanted to fight it, she couldn't deny the way her heart pounded against her ribcage, or how the air between them felt thick with an unspoken pull. Up close, she noticed the sharp angles of his face, the way his strong jaw clenched with restraint, and how the dim candlelight softened his usually fierce features. Under all that strength, there was a raw, untamed beauty to him, one that made it even harder to resist. "I don't want this," she whispered, even as her body betrayed her, leaning ever so slightly into him. A low growl rumbled in his chest. "Liar." Before she could retort, his lips brushed the edge of her jaw, feather-light yet searing, igniting a fire deep within her. Asina howled inside her, and she could feel Xavier pressing against his control. But just as quickly as the moment came, Rhaegar pulled back, clenching his jaw as if fighting a war within himself. Frustration flickered in his storm-gray eyes as he abruptly stood. "You make this difficult, Kela," he muttered, running a hand through his hair. He turned and strode toward the door, his shoulders tense with restraint. She swallowed hard, still trembling from the weight of their connection. "Then stop coming to me," she said, her voice steadier than she felt. He let out a bitter chuckle, pausing at the doorway. "That's the problem, little wolf. I can't." His voice was laced with frustration, but beneath it was something deeper, an unspoken admission of just how much she affected him. Kela's breath hitched involuntarily, her body betraying her as a shiver ran down her spine. For a brief second, she nearly reached out, her fingers twitching at her side, but she quickly clenched them into fists. She would not give in. Rhaegar saw it. The slight movement, the hesitation, and his storm-gray eyes darkened before he turned away, leaving her trembling in the silence of the locked room. Rhaegar leaned against the cold stone wall outside her door, exhaling harshly as he ran a hand through his hair. His body was still thrumming with the fire of their bond, a force he had never struggled against before. He had thought himself unshakable, unmovable. But Kela was different. He hadn't felt this lost since the tournament. Back then he had been prepared for another victory, another warrior to fall before him. But then, There was the masked fighter. Ferocious. Relentless. Every strike she delivered, every move she countered had forced him to push harder than he had in years. He remembered the moment he thought he might lose, something that had never crossed his mind before, and then her helmet had fallen. Golden hair. Piercing emerald eyes. His mate. The world had stilled in that moment, his heart slamming against his ribs as realization crashed over him like a tidal wave. He had found her, and she had been hiding. Now she still refused him. Despite everything, despite the undeniable pull of fate, she fought him every step of the way. It infuriated him. It tempted him. Rhaegar clenched his jaw, pushing off the wall. She could deny it all she wanted, but she was his. He had lost too much already, and he would not lose her. Not to fear, not to pride. She would accept her place at his side, even if she wasn't ready to admit it yet. But he had to be careful. If he pushed too hard, she would break. And the last thing he wanted was for her to see him as a monster. With a frustrated growl, he stalked down the corridor, leaving the guarded door behind him. He needed to do something, anything, to change this course. He could not keep locking her away like a prisoner. As much as he wanted to claim her, she needed to come to him willingly. His heart was a battlefield of conflict, torn between his possessiveness and a yearning he had buried for years. Without hesitation, he summoned his beta, Andrew. Andrew arrived promptly, his sharp gaze assessing Rhaegar's tense posture. "Something on your mind, my lord?" he asked, arms crossed. Rhaegar exhaled heavily. "I want to bring change for Kela. I can't keep her locked up. She needs to see the pack, move freely within my lands. Assign the best warriors to guard her, but give her space." Andrew's brow lifted in surprise. The great Alpha King finally coming to his senses. About damn time you came out of your depression. Rhaegar shot him a glare but didn't deny it. "She won't break easily, Andrew. She's strong. Stronger than I expected. If we try to force her, she'll fight harder." Andrew nodded, a knowing smirk tugging at his lips. "She's an alpha, Rhaegar. She was never going to submit without a war. But you also can't just trap her and expect her to come willingly." A shadow crossed Rhaegar's expression, the memories of his past creeping in. "I lost once before. I won't lose again, but—" He hesitated before sighing. "I haven't felt this in a long time. She's different." Andrew's teasing expression softened. "Then don't make the same mistakes, my lord. You have to show her the man you were before you lost your wife. She's not just a mate to claim, Rhaegar. She's your equal. And if you want her to see that, you need to stop scaring her into submission." Rhaegar clenched his jaw, the words striking deeper than he wanted to admit. "Then we do this your way. Make the arrangements. Ensure she has her freedom. Within reason." Andrew smirked. "Of course, my lord, I'll handle it, but let me say one thing. She may be your second chance, but if you don't handle this right, she might just slip away, and this time, you won't get another." Andrew folded his arms and glanced around the dimly lit hall. "And while we're at it, Rhaegar, take a good look around you. This place, it's not exactly inviting. The pack is silent, the castle is neglected, and the joy that once thrived here is gone. She's going to notice that." Rhaegar exhaled heavily, rubbing a hand down his face. "You're right. It wasn't always like this," he admitted. After I lost her, I stopped caring. About everything." Andrew nodded, his expression serious. "Then maybe it's time you start again. If you want Kela to feel like she belongs, this pack needs to change. Hire more trustworthy staff, renovate the castle, restore it to its former glory. Show her that this isn't just a place to be trapped in, it's a place she could call home." Rhaegar considered his words, then nodded slowly. "Fine. I'll see to it personally. If she has any hope of staying, she needs to see that things are different." Andrew smirked again. "Now that's more like it. Just don't forget, you can't force this, Rhaegar. She's an alpha in her own right. Give her the freedom she needs. Let her see the man you were before your grief hardened you." Only then will she come to you willingly. Rhaegar clenched his jaw, the weight of it settling on him. Then let's start making those changes, immediately. The next morning, Ella walked into Kela's room carrying a tray of breakfast, her expression lighter than usual. Good news, she announced, setting the tray down. Beta Andrew has informed me that we are now allowed to walk the castle grounds freely. Of course, there will be guards, but they've been ordered to keep their distance. Kela looked up, surprised. Really? That's unexpected. Ella nodded, pouring tea into a cup. I think the Alpha is trying to make things more comfortable for you. And I have to say, something's changing. The castle is getting repaired. New staff are being hired, and people are beginning to talk. This is all for you, Kela. Kela frowned but didn't respond. Over the next few days, she and Ella spent more time outside, exploring the neglected, but now slowly transforming castle. Workers scrubbed the halls, fixed broken railings, and repainted the walls. The gardens, once overgrown and forgotten, were being tended to again. But despite it all, Kela remained determined. No amount of change would make her forget that she had been taken against her will. One morning, Beta Andrew surprised them by leading them to a greenhouse attached to Kela's new chambers. The moment she stepped inside, her breath caught. The structure was made of tall glass panels framed with iron, allowing sunlight to pour in. Inside, exotic plants and vines draped along the walls, the scent of fresh flowers mixing with the crisp air. In the center, a well-equipped training area had been set up. Mats, wooden dummies, and even a small weapons rack. Rhaegar wanted you to have a space where you could train in peace, Andrew said, watching her reaction closely. Figured you'd be more comfortable here than in the open yard. Ella smiled at the sight, nudging Kela gently. This is beautiful, Kela. He's really trying. Kela ran a hand over one of the wooden dummies, her expression unreadable. She would use this, but she wouldn't let it change. Ella smiled at the sight, nudging Kela gently. Murmured. Ella sighed, knowing Kela's stubbornness, but she also knew everything being done was for her. The renovations, the changes, the freedom. But would it be enough to sway Kela's heart? What she didn't notice during these days was the quiet figure watching them. One of the gardeners, a man with a wiry frame and sharp eyes, listened closely to their conversations. He had been waiting for the right moment, and now it had come. He was sure of it. Kela had not been marked yet. She was not wearing the mark of the Alpha King. That was all the proof Alpha Magnus needed. The moment came when Kela and Ella made their move. Under the cover of night, they slipped out of the castle grounds, heading toward the Moonlight Pack's territory. They were careful, moving fast and silently, but it wasn't enough. The gardener had already sent word. Before they could reach the safety of the Moonlight Pack, shadows emerged from the trees surrounding them. Strong hands seized them, muffling their screams. Alpha Magnus had been waiting for this opportunity, and he was not about to let it slip away. Kela and Ella had been kidnapped before they could reach home. Rhaegar awoke abruptly, his instincts screaming that something was wrong. The scent of Kela, the constant presence that had been lingering in his chambers, was gone. A deep growl rumbled in his chest as he stormed toward her chambers, shoving the door open only to find the room empty. The sheets on the bed were untouched, and the air felt stale. She was gone. His fists clenched as realization dawned. She had run. With a furious roar, he summoned Beta Andrew. Gather the strongest warriors. We ride to the Moonlight Pack immediately. Andrew's brows furrowed, but he nodded, instantly relaying the orders. Within moments, Rhaegar and his army were in their wolves, tearing through the night toward the Moonlight Pack's lands. The moment they arrived at the pack house, Alpha Dorian, Beta Thomas, and several warriors stood at the entrance, already waiting. Rhaegar dismounted, his storm-gray eyes blazing. Where is she? He demanded. Dorian frowned, glancing at Thomas, who took a hesitant step forward. What do you mean Alpha Kela never came? Rhaegar's body went rigid. What? Thomas swallowed hard. She left, but she never made it here. This can only mean one thing. Magnus. A deadly silence followed before a violent growl erupted from Rhaegar's throat. That bastard. His hands curled into fists, his entire frame shaking with rage. He dared to take her? Andrew stepped forward. Then we don't wait. We march now. Gather both armies and head for Bloodfang territory. Dorian, though hesitant, nodded. We will fight with you. Kela is my daughter. I won't let that monster keep her. Without another word, Rhaegar turned on his heel, his presence exuding fury and power. Within minutes, 2 armies were riding toward Magnus's lands, ready for war. Meanwhile, inside Magnus's stronghold, Kela and Ella were locked in his chambers. The room was grand but suffocating, lined with dark wood and draped in heavy, oppressive fabrics. Kela sat shackled to the wall, the silver restraints burning against her wrists, sapping her strength. She refused to let Magnus see her pain. Magnus smirked as he crouched before her, brushing a strand of hair from her face in a mockingly gentle gesture. His fingers lingered, his grip deceptively light, yet there was something darker beneath his touch. He had been so certain of his control, so assured that she would be his, that Rhaegar would fall, that fate would bow to his will. But now, the cracks were forming. Kela's emerald eyes, burning with defiance rather than fear, sent a wave of frustration coursing through him. He had lost control of the situation, and it infuriated him. He leaned in, his voice laced with cruelty. You thought you could escape me, little wolf? You thought Rhaegar could protect you? Pathetic. Kela met his gaze with defiance, her emerald eyes burning with fury. He will come for me, Magnus, and when he does, he will destroy you. Magnus chuckled darkly. Oh, I'm counting on it, let him come. But before that happens, I think it's time I claim what should have been mine. He leaned in, tilting her chin up, his lips hovering dangerously close to her neck. Kela's body tensed, rage and revulsion warring within her. Even with the silver chains, she summoned every ounce of her remaining strength and lashed out, slamming her forehead into his nose. Magnus staggered back, cursing as blood dripped from his nostrils. You little, he roared, grabbing her jaw with bruising force. But before he could do anything more, a deep, chilling howl split through the air, echoing through the walls of his fortress. It was a sound of pure wrath and dominance, a warning that sent a ripple of fear through his warriors. Magnus's expression shifted from anger to shock. He's here, he muttered. But then another howl followed, layered over the first. A second army had arrived. His face paled. The Moonlight Pack? He breathed, realization dawning on him. He had expected Rhaegar, but he had not anticipated Kela's father to march with him. The ground trembled as the armies of the Dark Moon and Moonlight Packs crashed upon his gates, their battle cries filling the night. Magnus knew, in that moment, he had miscalculated terribly. The battle was a storm of blood and fury, the clash of warriors echoing through the night. Rhaegar fought with a primal ferocity, his wolf pushing to the surface, demanding complete control. He tore through Magnus's warriors, his claws dripping with the blood of those who stood in his way. His vision blurred with rage, the mate bond pounding through him like a war drum, urging him forward, commanding him to reach Kela. But it was too much. He felt his control slipping, his wolf nearly overtaking him, the beast within ready to rip apart everything in his path. It wasn't until a desperate thought of Kela, her voice, her defiance, her unwavering strength, flashed in his mind that he forced himself to hold back. He could not become the monster Magnus was. He was not fighting just for vengeance, he was fighting for her. With renewed focus, Rhaegar lunged for Magnus, his power unstoppable. Nothing, not even the strongest of warriors, could keep him from reaching his mate. Rhaegar was a force of nature, his wolf a harbinger of death as he tore through Magnus's forces with unmatched ferocity. Claws slashed through armor, fangs ripped into flesh, and the air was filled with the desperate cries of Magnus's warriors as they fell one by one. The battlefield became a blood-soaked wasteland, littered with the bodies of those who dared stand in his way. His eyes burned with unrelenting rage, his movements fueled by the need to reclaim what was his. Each blow, each kill was a step closer to Kela, And nothing, not even the walls of Magnus's stronghold, would stop him from reaching her. The Moonlight Pack warriors fought with equal vengeance, reclaiming the daughter of their alpha. Within the hour, the Bloodfang stronghold fell, and Magnus was forced to his knees before Rhaegar. With one final blow, Magnus was defeated. As he crumpled to the ground, pain surged through his body, not just from the physical blows, but from the stark realization that everything he had fought for was slipping away. His vision blurred, his breath shallow as he gazed up at the towering form of Rhaegar. For the first time, fear flickered in Magnus's silver eyes. He had underestimated his enemy. He had thought himself invincible, yet now he lay broken at the feet of the Alpha King, powerless and dethroned. A bitter, fleeting regret curled in his chest. Had he taken a different path? Had he made different choices? Would he have stood victorious? But it was too late for remorse. His reign was over, and he had lost everything. His beta, having witnessed his alpha's reckless downfall, stepped forward and bowed to Rhaegar and Dorian. Magnus has lost the right to rule. I submit and pledge loyalty to the new order. Rhaegar, still seething with rage, barely spared the fallen alpha a glance before rushing inside. He found Kela where Magnus had left her, still shackled, but her eyes burned with the same strength she always carried. He freed her in one swift motion, and the moment she was loose, she stumbled into his arms, exhausted, but relieved. His grip on her tightened, as if afraid to let go. She looked up at him, her gaze softer than before. "I won't run again," she whispered, the words carrying the weight of all her struggles. For the first time, she allowed herself to truly feel the bond between them, not just the pull of fate, but the safety and strength he offered. Her mind fought against the surrender, but her body betrayed her, melting into his warmth. She had spent so long running, resisting, convincing herself that she had to fight alone. But standing before him now, exhausted and free from Magnus's grasp, she realized something else entirely. She didn't have to. Not anymore. Rhaegar exhaled, his hands cupping her face, his touch firm yet reverent. The mate bond between them roared to life, an undeniable force crackling like fire between their bodies. His thumb brushed over her lower lip, his storm-gray eyes searching hers, as if ensuring she truly meant the words she had spoken. "You are mine, Kela, and we can both rule our packs as alphas together as equals," he murmured, his voice husky, thick with emotion he could no longer suppress. "But I will never let anything take you away from me again." His lips crashed onto hers, the kiss raw, demanding, filled with a longing that had been building from the moment their bond had been revealed. Kela gasped into the kiss, her fingers instinctively clutching onto his tunic, her entire body alight with sensation. A shudder ran down her spine as his hand slid down, wrapping around her waist, pulling her flush against him, their bodies fitting together as if they were made to be one. Heat coiled low in her belly, the mate bond thrumming with overwhelming intensity, pressing against her resolve. His scent, his warmth, the strength of his hold, it was intoxicating. Her wolf, Asena, howled in submission, yearning to be closer, to let go of every ounce of defiance. Rhaegar growled against her lips, his control unraveling. His forehead pressed to hers as he panted, his breath mingling with hers. "Goddess, you have no idea how long I've wanted this." Kela swallowed, her heart pounding as her fingers traced the hard planes of his chest. She had fought against this bond, against him, for so long. But here, in his arms, she felt safe. She felt whole. A slow smile curved her lips as she whispered, "Then stop holding back, Alpha." His eyes darkened with desire at her words, and with a deep, possessive growl, he captured her lips once more. The war was over, and she was finally his. Kela gasped into the kiss, her fingers instinctively clutching onto his tunic, her entire body